So I put a set of scripts together that I'm calling M.A.R.S, Master's Automated Retrieval System. Cheesy, I know, but I wanted to come up with a catchy name for everything. It contains 6 scripts. What it'll do for you is allow you to build a library of master files to use for processing and stacking your images. Your master bias, your master darks, and your master flats. So whichever camp you're in as far as calibration frames are concerned, we've got that all covered. What's nice about this is once you create this library of masters, you keep them stored in a single directory somewhere on your computer, and you never have to touch them again. You run the scripts that I put together for you. The scripts will know where your library is at and search for the correct masters that it needs, whether it's biases, darks, or flats. So a little bit of work in the beginning, but once you get it set up, it's point and click. You don't need to copy your masters over to your current working directory and rename them like I did in that last video a few months ago. It's completely automated once you get it all set up. The way it all works is a little known feature within Siril that they released in version 1.2.0 called path parsing. And what path parsing is, in a nutshell, basically is when Siril loads up an image, it'll read its FITS header. You can tell it what parts of that FITS header that you are interested in, so which attributes that you want to pull from it. So based on that, it'll create all your masters for you and give them the specified file name that you want them to have. And then when you run the processing script, it does the same thing. It'll read those attributes from the FITS header and go and search your library for a matching file, and that's how it knows what to use. Like I said, you don't need a copy of anything over. You don't need to rename. It does not copy things over and rename it. It just, everything sits over here in your library, and the scripts know where to go to look for what they need. So to get the scripts installed, I'm not going to cover that in this video. I have a video, I'll leave a link up here for it, that goes over how to download and install any scripts that you want to use with Siril. So check that out if you're unfamiliar with how to do that first, and then come back and watch the video once you get everything set up. Download links, as always, will be in the description, as well as the path parsing commands that you're going to need to configure Siril with. So make sure you check the description for anything that you need. The last thing that I want to say, these scripts are for those of us that use cold astronomy cameras. If you're shooting with a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, they don't produce FIT files. There is some data behind the scenes that are similar to a FITS file, but nothing close to what we need for these scripts to work. Specifically, anyway, with a dark file anyways, you always want to be at the same temperature that you shot that night. Too much of a variable, you can't keep it cold. The temperature can go up and down throughout the night. So these scripts aren't for you guys, unfortunately. This video is kind of long because I really want to give a good understanding of not only just how to use it, but how it actually works. So if you guys want to build your own path parsing commands to use with other acquisition software, you'll be able to do that as well. So let's get to it and check it out. My name is Rich, and you're watching Deep Space Astro. Okay, with the scripts installed, just to show you what they will look like, you'll see the 6 new entries in your scripts menu. The first 3 are for creating your masters. So the first one is for the master bias, and then the master dark, and the master flats. The last 3 are the OSC pre-processing script that comes with Siril, just modified to use the whole path parsing piece that we're going to be going over here. So they pre-process and stack just like the OSC pre-processing script does, with the addition of using our master darks, biases, and flats. So just a brief description. This first one here, OSC pre-processing master dark, that means that it is going to look for a master dark file only and use it for processing and stacking your image. So if you just shot lights and you only have dark libraries, you didn't do flats and biases, that would be the one that you want to use. This is the one that I use mostly because I set up and tear down every night. So as you know, if you do that, you should create a new set of flats because you don't want the dust moving around, and then your calibration flats just aren't going to do their job correctly because things are different on somewhere in the image train possibly than they were the night that you shot. So with this one, with the OSC pre-processing master dark and bias, this one just requires your light frames and your flat frames. And then the third one here is everything. So all you would need is just your light frames. It will use a master dark, and it will use the master flat. And the master flat obviously is calibrated with the master bias, so it won't be searching for a master bias when you're using it. But we'll go over these a little bit more later. For now, I want to go over how all of this works. So if we come over into our menu and hit preferences, and then come into pre-processing, these top 3 fields, master bias, master dark, and master flat, this is what will make this whole system work. If you don't have these in here, or if you don't have them in here correctly, the scripts are just going to fail. When you get to the point that maybe you want to customize the way everything works, this is where you're going to be making the changes. You do not need to modify any of the scripts that I provided unless you need to for another reason. That's fine as well. But If you want to add additional fits header information into your file names, or take out some stuff maybe that I have in that you don't think is necessary for your use case, these 3 fields are where you do that. You don't need to touch the scripts. So that's what we're going to do first, is we're going to populate these fields, and then I want to spend some time going over what the path parsing lines actually are doing for us. So if you look in the description of the video, you will find these lines that we're going to be using today. One for the master bias, one for the master dark, one for the master flat. So simply copy each of those lines and paste them into Siril. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we're going to discuss how everything else here works. So there's the line for the master bias, the line for the master dark, and then the line for my master flat. And one thing you'll notice when we jump back over on the other screen, it shows C:\masters. I have mine set to D. So this is the first thing we're going to talk about, is where these files are going to be created. I keep mine on a second drive on my D drive. So that's why, if you guys happen to notice that without me saying anything, that's why it looks different. I have a D drive where I store everything, although the code samples show the C drive. So once you get those 3 in place, just click apply. And like I said, now I want to talk about how all this stuff works. So real quick summary, as an example, the master bias with this line in place, when the script utilizes the path parsing and it creates our master bias for us, the file will end up with this naming convention in the C masters directory. In my case, it's going to be in the D drive. Same thing with the dark. The path parsing line in here will end up with a file named in this manner. And in the master flat, your file will end up named in this manner. So let's go over how all this is going to work. I'm going to use the master dark as our example here. And I tried to color code it so you can follow the colors to see where they relate and build this file with. So in Siril, this is the line that I have in the master dark field. And the first one, again, C masters, is where I'm storing all of my masters. This can be wherever you want, on whatever hard drive you want. It could be in a subdirectory. Just make sure you provide the correct path in here to where you're actually storing everything. So for my example, I show C masters, but I'm actually on D masters. I left it C because I know generally most people will probably be running on their C drive. The first part of it is in magenta here, and even though it's truncated, it's instrument. So the first thing that I want to point out is you'll notice, and let me turn off this mouse highlighter so you guys can, this doesn't get in the way. So in magenta, the first thing you'll notice with all of these that are color coded, for most of these that are color coded, they start and they end with a $sign. Anything between those 2 $signs is what it's going to be looking for in the fits header. So if I come over to Siril and just open up any image, it could be a light, a dark, it doesn't matter, and then right click and say fits header, you can see the fits header. And by the way, the other way of doing that too is from the command line. You can just type dump header and it'll put everything in the console for you if that's easier. But let's come over here just for the video, and we're going to look for that instrument attribute, which is right here. So in my fits header of this open image, my instrument value is Poseidon-C Pro. So if you look in the results section here, that's where the Poseidon-C Pro comes from. It encountered a space, so it inserted an underscore for us. The piece right after instrument, the :%S, you'll see that I'm using the %S in some places as well as the %D. The %S is just informing Siril to format that data that it pulled from that attribute as a string being a piece of text. The $D is telling it to format it as an integer. An integer is just a number. And just as a side note, if that integer happens to be, for this example, 10.123, it'll drop the decimal point and everything to the right of it and just report back 10. So just be aware of that. So again, instrument from the fits header, which is the Poseidon-C Pro, format it as a string. The part in green, dark underscore, it's not surrounded by the $sign, so it's not an attribute of the fits header that we're looking to pull. It can be deceiving because you can see the $sign from the attribute previous and the $sign from the attribute that's coming up next. So it looks like it's wrapped up in there, but it's not. Just be aware of that. That's why I broke them out this way, so it's hopefully a little bit easier to read. So the dark underscore, as I have indicated down here, is simply just plain text. And if you look in the file name of the fit file, you see it does just that, dark underscore. I could have typed dark library if I wanted to, and then in the file name, it would say dark library. So that's simply just text that I'm adding into the file name, and then adding the underscore. I have underscores between each of these values just for readability. They're not needed. If you want to take them out, you can take them out. You can see there's one at the end of each of these lines. That's where these underscores come from in between all of our values. So, all right, we got our camera name and we've got our dark. Next attribute that's coming up, again, in between the dollar signs, is our exposure time. So it's going to go and it's going to look for the EXP time in our fit header, which is right here. This file I have open says 600, but my example came from a 300-second exposure time, but you get the idea. Again, %D, it's telling Siril that this is an integer. It is a number, so treat it as such. And then after the dollar sign, I have a lowercase s, and you can see what that's doing. So it's grabbing a 300, and then it's just slapping the S at the end of it. So it reads 300 seconds for us. Same thing with the gain, except with the gain, I have it preceded with the letter G, as you can see down here in the file name, G for gain. Pull the gain, which is 125, %D, treat it as an integer. Dollar sign wraps it up. We're done with that one. Same thing with offset. O in the front of the number for the offset, pull the offset, which is 30, and then wrap it up with the closing dollar sign. Next one is our set temp. Now, set temp in Nina and Astro Photography Tool and the ASI-A.R.S. is the temperature that you specify that you wanted the camera sensor to be cooled down to. It is not the actual temperature of the sensor. And that's important, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So with this one, again, it starts with the letter T, which you see down here in the file name, and then it gets the value of set temp, which is -10, formats it as a number, and then puts a capital C at the end. So our final looks like T minus 10 degrees Celsius. Last one is for binning. Again, BIN is something that I added. That's what you see right here. And then it goes and it grabs the X binning, which is a value of 1, and treats it as an integer. The last part of it is just the .fit. That's our file extension for the file that it's going to create. Again, in blue, see masters. It's just telling you that this entire file that we went over, that is where it's going to save this file when you're running the scripts to create the masters. It works the same way when you run either of those 3 scripts that do the pre-processing and the stacking for you. When it goes to calibrate your images, it's going to look for this file because it's going to use these same attributes from the fits header of those light frames and try and find a match in your library. And we'll have multiple masters, right? We'll have one for 300 seconds, for 600 seconds, for 60 seconds, however many that you need, however many that you've been shooting with. You build that library up and it'll come in using all this information, look in the lights fits header, and try and find a match to use during the calibration. Now, I want to back up real quick and point out something different in the master flat. The master flat has one extra attribute that I have it looking for, and that's telescope. And the reason that I did that, and I show it right here, here's the telescope one, is anybody that's going to be using a master flat, there's a chance they have more than one rig. If you have just one, then it's not a concern. But if you had 2 rigs set up that you never tear down, that you wanted to use a master flat for each of them, master flats can't be, they have to be used on the imaging train they were created from, right? So if I have 2 rigs that I never tear down and I want to use a master flat for each of them, each of those master flats need to be created on each of those individual rigs. So I put the telescope name in there, hoping that that would be a good way to be able to identify which rig the flats came from. So when you're doing your processing, that same information will be in your lights frame. So what we just went over, these specific values that we're pulling from our fits header, all exist if you're using Nina, Astro Photography Tool, or the ASI-A.R.S, and possibly others. I only looked at 5 different acquisition softwares, or those 3, Nina, APT, and the ASI-A.R.S, all have these values, so everything should work just fine for you. The other 2 that I looked at was SharpCap and KStars. So for the most part, they're the same, but there are a couple differences, specifically in SharpCap. SharpCap, instead of using offset for the offset, they use black level. Offset does not exist. So you would need to copy this line and put it into Siril for your bias up here where we set everything else previously, right? So this would change where it says offset. You'd want to copy and paste that line for SharpCap. So this reads black level. And I'll also leave these down in the description too. So if you guys are running SharpCap or KStars, you can just grab them and this is all set and will work for you. The other difference with SharpCap is they do not have set temp. They have CCD temp. This one I have a little bit of a concern with because, like I mentioned before, set temp is the temperature that you specify that you want your sensor cooled to. CCD temp is the actual temperature of your sensor when that image was taken. Since the set temp doesn't exist, you have to change it to CCD temp. Now you're pulling the actual sensor temperature, not the actual value that you set it to be. It'll work, but there's a potential for failure here. And in my testing, what that is if the first image that Siril opens in its sequence happens to be different than what you expected. So if you set your temperature, your sensor to cool down to -10 degrees Celsius, and for whatever reason, that single exposure that ends up being the first image that Siril opens up in the sequence, say the temperature was -9, not -10, -9 is going to be written to your fits header. And then when you go to process using the scripts, it's going to look for a master file with a -9 in its file name. And if you set everything to -10, then those are what your masters are going to be set at, right? So it's going to fail. So two things need to happen for that failure to occur. First of all, the temperature needs to fluctuate away from your set temperature. Again, if you're at -10 and then went -11 or -9, that's the first thing. The second thing, it would have to be on the very first image that gets loaded in the sequence, which seems to be the very first image of your session, but I can't promise that. If those two things happen, then you will see that error message that it can't load and it just won't be able to stack because it couldn't find the dark master that it was looking for. If it happens to fluctuate during the night and it stamps some of your light images with that -9, as long as that first one was -10 in the sequence, then everything will be fine, because again, it's using the first image that it opens up to read the fits header to go and find the masters that it needs. I hope that all makes sense. If you guys have any questions about it, obviously leave me a comment and I'll try and explain it better if I didn't do a good job here. To get around that, there's a few things you can do. The one I wouldn't recommend because it's just a bad idea, but if it's just one file, if it's just that first file, you could just delete that file, right? But now you're throwing away data. Who wants to do that if it's good data? The second thing you could do is modify the fits header. So you could go in there and you could change that -9 to -10 and then run it through the script again and everything will be fine. Or you could leave it as is at the -9 and make a copy of your -10 master dark, for example, and rename it to be -9 and then run the script again. Now you got a -9 and a -10 master dark. You know they're both basically -10, but a degree one way or the other throughout the night probably isn't going to make that big of a difference. So that's going to be the tricky part with it. One more thing about SharpCap, I did post in their forums, and Robin Glover, the developer, responded back. I had asked him about these two attributes, if it would be possible to also have an offset attribute included in the fits header along with the black level, as well as adding a set temp along with his CCD temp that's already in there. And he seemed to indicate that that was a possibility. So in a future version, the set temp and the offset may show up. So keep an eye out on that as the updates come down. That moves us into KStars. KStars is good to go. The only issue it has is the same thing that we have with the set temp. There is no set temp for KStars. You'll have to use these lines for the configuration in Siril, which uses CCD temp. Same concerns apply that we just went over for SharpCap. So, all right, so now that we have everything configured and in place, we just click apply and we're ready to go. I am just gonna close Siril and open it back up just to get a clean interface going here. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is to create our library, right? We're going to create whatever it is that you need. The way to do that, just like any of the scripts that Siril runs, your calibration frames need to be in your working directory. So hit your blue house button. For me, my working directory is this 2024 415 folder under my Sunflower Galaxy. You can see I have my darks, my biases, my lights, and my flats. All I really need for this script to create my master bias is just the biases folder, but I have everything in here ready to go because I'm going to be creating the other masters as well. But just know that if you're just doing a new set of biases or just a new set of darks, you just need to make sure that those relative directories are in your working directory. We're gonna hit cancel because I'm already in my working directory. As you can see up here, we're gonna come up to scripts and I am going to come down to the M.A.R.S section of my menu and click on the DSA-M.A.R.S create master bias. You can watch it over on the console on the right hand side. It will not take too long depending on the speed of your computer. And if we come back over to my D drive, like I said, I store my masters. I'm gonna store my masters on my D drive. You will see I have a new folder now named Masters. It created the folder for me, so you don't need to do that ahead of time. And I open that up, and there is my master bias file named per everything that we had in those fields in the configuration for Siril. Now that I have my master bias, I'm going to create my master dark. Again, my working directory has all my calibration frames in it, including my darks. So I'm going to come up to the scripts. And this time I'm going to run the create master dark script. Give it a few seconds to get through and finish the stacking on that. And again, jump back over to my masters on my D drive, and there's my master dark. Same thing with the flats. Come over to scripts. We'll hit the master flat script. This one will actually create a master bias for you in case it's not there already, and then use it to calibrate your master flats. So just be aware of that. Once it's done, again, back into the masters directory, there's my flat master now. Now, before we get into using the processing scripts, I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to bring in my entire library that I have stored off on my network. So you can see that I'll have a mix of darks in here specifically to use with the scripts, and you can see how it searches through there. So I want to show you guys that no matter how many masters you've created, it will search through that entire library for you and use the correct one. So, okay, so I've got my other dark masters installed here. I have one for 60 seconds, 120, 300, 480, and 60. So my flat in here, and then my bias. I only have one bias because I generally only shoot at gain 125 with an offset of 30, so that works for whatever exposure time I run at. One more thing I wanted to mention as well too, once you're done creating your master files, just like always with all the scripts, you end up with a process directory. Once you're done creating your masters, you can go ahead and delete that. You don't need it any longer. It's just taking up hard drive space. So now we'll start going through the 3 processing and stacking scripts that we have here using the different sets of masters. We'll start with the script where you only have your dark masters. You don't shoot flats, you don't shoot biases, you just shoot darks. So I am going to move these calibration frame folders out of my working directory, so you can see that all I need is lights for this to work. So let's see, where do I want to put this? We'll just make a folder over here, and I'm just gonna dump everything over there. So now if I go back into my working directory for the Sunflower Galaxy, you can see I just have my lights folders, right? I got 40 images in here. I don't have any calibration frames, but I do have a master dark in my master library that will find a match when I run the script. So again, scripts, DSA-M.A.R.S OSC preprocessing, master dark, meaning that's the only master it's going to look for in my library is the dark. So just click it and run. Like I said before, this does the same exact thing as the OSC preprocessing script from Siril, except it's utilizing our library now for our masters. So we'll let this finish. Okay, stacking is complete, and just like all the other scripts, if we click our open button and open up our result file, we can give this a quick auto stretch, and you can see the telltale signs that it did not use calibration frames because of the vignetting in here. There's a couple of dust spots, but I don't know if you guys can see them, but this was just stacked with the lights and the darks. If you go over into your console and you scroll up high enough and look for the running command calibrate, you can see right here which master dark file it actually used. So there's your verification that it used the correct master dark file for calibrating your image. Let's go through the next one here. So if I again come back, again we're done. So I'm going to delete the process and the result file that it created. And this time we're going to stack the same session, but we're going to stack it with a script that not only uses the master dark, but it'll also use the master flat. And again, in doing so, that's all we need are our lights. Come back up and we'll run the M.A.R.S master dark flat. Give that a few minutes to finish. Okay, so that stack is complete, and again we'll just open it up and give it a quick auto stretch just to look at it. And you can see my vignetting is gone, my dust is gone, because it calibrated with the flats that time as well as the dark masters. Again, you can scroll up through the console and you can see the files that it was using. The final and third script is the one that I use most of the time because, again, I tear down every night and reshoot flats. So again, we're going to remove the process directory and the result from the previous run, and I'm going to go back and grab my flats. So this is what the end of my typical session would look like for in my working directory. I'm going to have my lights, and I'm going to have a fresh set of flats that I had taken. At that point, I'm ready to go. So we're going to use the M.A.R.S OSC preprocessing master dark and bias. And what this one will do is it'll take the master bias file and calibrate my flats for me. Also grab the master dark and do the calibration with that as well. So again, just run it. It goes and it looks for what it needs in your library and applies it to your current stack for you. And once again, when it's complete, we can just open up our stack and take a quick look at it and see that everything looks good, right? There's no dust, there's no vignetting. It calibrated my flats with my master bias and also used the master dark in its calibration and stacking process. So that covers the 6 scripts in the M.A.R.S package, but there's some other benefits of using this path parsing as well. So if we come back over, just so you guys are aware, into our preferences, and our pre-processing, where we enter these fields in, you can see options over here that say use it as default. If you're manually stacking and pre-processing, you can use these. If you just tick these boxes, whichever ones you need, it will work the same way the script does, and go and search in your masters directory, look through your library, and find the matching file that it needs to do the calibration with. So that in itself is really nice, even if you're not going to use the scripts, right? Get your masters built and put your path parsing lines in here and tick these to use as default, and they will be used as you go through your calibration, registration, and stacking of your files. So that leads me into the next thing that I wanted to cover is maybe you already have your master library built. You already have your darks, your biases, your flats, all that stuff, and you want to be able to use these scripts, but you don't want to have to recreate all that stuff again. You don't have to if you don't want to. So to show you how to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete my entire library just so you guys can see the file come in. So then back up here underneath sessions and master files, I took one of my dark stacks and I renamed it, right? Just setting the example like you have an existing library already, and the chances that your naming conventions match exactly what we just went through here today with the path parsing are probably slim to none. So you don't need to go, you can go in here and manually rename everything if you wanted to, but there's a lot easier way. Simply take this file and open it up in Siril. So HHD, so master files, there's my stack. So now I got that master dark opened up in Siril. I can come down to the command line and just type save space $def dark. And what $def dark is just referencing what we have up in our preferences. So if I go back to preprocessing, that $def dark is looking at this line right here. So with that in place, just hit enter. It'll go through and it made a copy of this file. It didn't touch this one. It's going to leave your original ones alone, so that's important. But it made a copy of this one, brought it over into the master's directory, and named it the way that we expect it to be named so it can be used with the scripts. So you can run through each and every one of your master files and open them up, use the command line, and it'll rename it for you. So that was def dark. If we wanted to do, and I'm not going to go through it, I'll just show you the commands though. If we wanted to do a bias, it's the same thing. Instead of def dark, it's $def bias. If we're doing a flat, it's $def flat. And each of those three, like I said, relate to our configuration that we have up here in the preferences. So like I said in the beginning, a little bit of work to get it going, but once you get your head wrapped around it and you get everything set up, it's really cool to be able just to have your lights, maybe your flats, choose the script that you're going to run, and it does everything for you. You don't have to worry about calibration frames. You have your masters set up. Before we go, I want to say thanks to all of my members here on YouTube and Buy Me a Coffee. I appreciate your memberships. I appreciate everybody that watches, likes, comments, shares the videos. This channel has been, growing relatively steady for me, and it's become part of the hobby. It's a lot of fun. So once again, thank you to everybody. And until next time, we'll see you on the next video, and clear skies.